Hey everyone, Livy here, back with another video. Today is a special day because today I am finally covering the court cards and how I specifically tackled them early on in my tarot journey. I know a lot of people struggle with the courts, so I hope people find this incoming series helpful. And yes, you heard that correctly. This will be a series because there's a lot to say, and I also want to be able to provide examples. So, how this will work is today's video will be the introduction to the courts and what I already know about them before tarot even came into play. Then I'll give a general overview of how they apply to tarot and understanding them as kind of like 16 different archetypes that should encompass all of today's video. Now, future ones in this series will dive deep into the pages, the knights, the queens, and the kings. So without further ado, let's get into the general overview. Okay, first off, I have to say I kind of had an unfair advantage when it came to understanding the court system because I did study a bit of the medieval court system for my bachelor's degree. So for those who don't already know, I got my BA in English and creative writing, which means that I had to study a lot of old texts and had a lot of fascinating classes dedicated to specific areas of focus in literature. One of those happened to be a whole class dedicated to King Arthur, court life, and the concept of chivalry. And this is important because you can't really dissect the tales, the King Arthur mythos, right, themselves, without understanding how their society worked, you know? So, from my studies, right, I first and foremost knew the king was the supreme ruler, the master of their country or their area, right? And actually, sorry, I had this prepared and then, kind of went out the window a little bit. Let me give you guys a visual of this. This is from, the typical RWS. I just have the Modern Hue Tarot version of this so you guys can see. Anyways, let's get into that. The king was the supreme ruler, right? The king's word was also the final word, and everyone sought to please the king. Now, this is a concept that most people understand this and can get on board with it. We've seen this a lot in literature. We've seen this a lot in movies. So many things depict kings. So this is not a hard concept. But it's good to emphasize this because, maybe we just needed that general overview. But with that said, we also have the queens, okay? In medieval society, barely below the king was the queen, okay? And she also ruled with the king, but she didn't really have the final word and managed a lot of the castle or country's domestic affairs. So again, not given like supreme war powers or anything like that for the queen. And what I think a lot of people, this is also not too hard. Like people kind of understand, okay, the queen was also in command, but not as powerful as the king. This is not, again, a new concept. But I think what most people kind of get stuck with, though, is understanding how the knights and the pages come into play, correct? I think so. So, with that said, right, for the knights, okay, the knights, the best way to kind of describe them was that the knights were the will of the king. They went about serving the king's justice, but did strive to uphold the laws of chivalry, right? But because they were acting on behalf of a king, a lot of people couldn't afford to refuse or even evade the knights, right? So if you did get in trouble for whatever reason, you better believe that a knight was going to come and settle the dispute. So kind of like, I guess, modern day police in some ways. And this was done, by the way, because the king themselves could not always leave their castle whenever they wanted as the highest seat of power. So this is very important, right? The knights. Very, very important. This was especially even so in King Arthur tales, right? Because the knights were really the ones who went out and did things in the name of King Arthur. So same kind of relevance, right? Okay, but this is where it gets a little confusing for some, I think. At the most bottom rung of this hierarchy, even below what would have been a knight's squire, right, was the pages, okay? The pages, how do I explain this? The pages were essentially the errand boys of the knights and the kings. And I say errand boys because, again, medieval times, they didn't usually let, like, young girls do this kind of job. But, of course, we know now that anybody in relation to tarot could be a page. But, anyways, not the point, okay? They were errand boys. And you could say that the knights, you know, with the squires, right? Squires were knights in training, and they did have to deal with a lot of the knights' bullshit, especially like errands and stuff, specifically for knights. But pages were usually lower than that, and they were very, very young. Like, these would be like literal children most of the time. Squires did have to do chores for the knights, but pages had to do chores for everyone, especially from running messages to cleaning and everything in between. So this is where it gets kind of confusing, because I know people might have heard the term squire before, but pages were even lower than that, and pages are what are used specifically when it comes to tarot, right? The page. With all that said, you might be wondering why knowing this background is important, and it's mainly because without it, we wouldn't know why the court hierarchy is what it is, and we also wouldn't be able to understand their elemental alignment. Okay, and this is important. The elemental alignment goes with tarot because it also decided, you know, where they fall in the suits, okay? So, of course, we start again with the pages, right? Who fall under the earth element, which is easy to understand why given their background, okay? I don't think this is, like, this should be pretty easy, but let me explain, okay? The pages had to and were the most concerned with day-to-day life, okay? And having to manage so many things for others, since it was, you know, their job to manage things for others, they had to be practical, and they were the least likely to indulge in the other elements because they really didn't have time for that. And what I mean when I talk about that is, like, you know, we know in tarot that the earth suit is tied to the pentacles, the coins. So it's your work, your job, domestic affairs, things of that nature. The pages were that. They didn't have time to sit around and philosophize. They couldn't put their emotions into things. They couldn't really dedicate time to their passions because they were pages. They were just, you know, again, basic bottom feeders. So this is why it is what it is, okay? So that's why they're of earth in tarot, okay? Then, if we wanted to take it away, we have the knights again, okay? Now, this is where it gets a little, this gets a little tricky for some. We have the knights. I'm personally under the opinion they are the element of fire. Now, this is actually hotly debated in the tarot sphere, as many would argue they're of the air suit, but I have to disagree for a few reasons, especially given the historical points I already mentioned, okay? The first is the fact that just because they're the most likely to swing a sword, right, doesn't automatically mean they should be of the sword's air placement. I know that's wild to say, but it's true, okay? On top of that, as I already stated, the knights were active. They were serving the king's will. They were passionate, gung-ho, and didn't often question the logic of their king. It is because of those factors that the knights could really only be of the fire and wand suit, because they were energetic, they were going out there, they were doing things. Not to say that they never questioned their king ever, right? There were probably plenty of knights who did, but they didn't have much time to dabble in logic and mind games and all that shit. They had to be active. So this is why, to be honest, the knights, in my opinion, are a fire, and that's how I'm going to explain them through the rest of the series. So just be aware of that. If you disagree with me, we can agree to disagree, but I'm telling you from a historical point, this makes more sense, okay? But anyways, moving back from the kings, we have the queens again, okay? The queens. The queens are of the element of water, and for a few reasons. And unfortunately, I suspect that some of it has to do with old-timey misogyny of the thinking that women were generally, oh, they're more emotional than men, most concerned about relationships and love and things like that, right? So it's that same, reason why queens also weren't trusted as much politically, right? Or to be a political leader, given the final word at all, right? Now you can claim I'm wrong. But I had to put up with a lot of medieval texts that basically dissolved into LOL, those silly women, especially when it came to tales around Queen Guinevere and Morgan Le Fay. I don't know why, just queens were always like suspected or like given the shaft, So I'm pretty sure it's for that kind of reason that Tarot also adopted the queens as the water cup suit. Unfortunate, but, this is why it is what it is, okay? But finally, we're going to go back into the kings, okay? The kings. They, in my opinion, are the rightful rulers of the air sword suit. Once again, I have a reasoning for this. As the heads of the kingdoms, the king had to be the most logical, clear-headed, and diplomatic of them all, right? He was the most concerned with justice and dispensing judgment, and was also passive in the sense that the king couldn't afford to move around often. This is not to say that the kings weren't moving around, by the way. They had, kings were ridiculous. They had, so many different castles that they could go to at any point in time. So I don't mean they never moved ever. I just mean that they couldn't go off and have adventures on their own in the way that the knights could. So in that sense that they were very passive, right? And it's also not to say that no king could be passionate, but they had to be the most professional, right? Hence why I can't see them as any other element or suit than the air and the swords, right? They had to be the most concerned with logical. They had to be the most diplomatic. They had to play the mind games. So, kings, air, okay? Now that all this has been established, it's time to dive deeper into how this applies more to tarot, okay? Let me get into that in just a second. Okay, everyone. Like I said at the beginning of this video, I will have specific videos about each of the 4 courts, but I want to explain how I personally unlocked them early on beyond that traditional medieval system, okay? So you have to understand, I had that background, so I carried that into tarot. But what really helped me was kind of this, okay? See, it's not really a secret if you've been on my channel a while that the Raven's Prophecy Tarot was my first tarot deck. So luckily for me, it came with this amazing guidebook. In it, I think Maggie Stavater does a great job of interpreting the courts because she approaches them from a writer's perspective, okay? Writer. Which is honestly how you should best see the court cards, okay? Because if you are somebody who understands characters, it's easier to pick out these figures and who they are, Now, there are some general age rules, I guess, that are important to keep in mind, but I personally don't think they need to be set in stone, okay? Pages, if you want to play that game, right? Pages are generally seen as, ooh, I could even do this one, okay. Pages are generally seen as younger, okay. Or you could even argue that the pages are simply those who are young at heart, right? They don't have to be a literal, like, baby child animal, or even this, like, young girl, you know? Or, well, I guess that's a gnome, so I guess not technically young, right? And then, you know, many could argue, which is funny, showing the examples that I'm going to show for knights, okay? Knights used to generally be seen as, like, teenagers, or those who are actively pursuing their goals. I'm making that point because, again, you guys know on this channel, I don't give two shits about gender, so I'm, like, trying to devoid some of that, okay? So, knights, right? Then you could say, okay, what about queens? Well, I don't like this, but queens were usually seen as, like, older women figures, okay? And not to say, like, old women, but, like, generally, you know, they were seen as maybe, like, midlife women and beyond, okay? But I prefer to see them as someone who is experienced in life, but maybe doesn't have it all figured out yet. So they are not, like, if you had to look at the suits as, like, a stair ladder going up, on the bottom you have the pages, next step up, knights, queens, and then the kings, right? So when I say not all figured out yet, is like, if they had to objectively look at themselves, there's still areas of focus in life that they are trying to reach, right? There's still something, they're not all the way there yet, okay? Then, though, you have the kings. Once again, kings were usually seen as older men, traditionally. Again, I'm not really fond of that, that representation, right? But, so, actually, no, not but. So instead, I would say, right, that the kings are simply the masters of their suit. They have figured it all out. If they're a king of cup, they figured out their emotions. If they're the king of wands, they figured that out, right? Creativity, energy, all that. They know how to balance it all. They are the masters. They are the final say. And they have reached a point that others, you know, try to aspire to, right? And I say this because, again, I'm going to repeat it again. You can be of any age to be any of the courts, okay? And this is mainly important when it comes to, by the way, significators, because some people definitely fall under the rules of saying, well, the court cards have to be significators. And that's true to an extent, but you don't always have to use the courts as significators. If you do, or if they come up as people, just keep that in mind. It's not always about gender or age at all, okay? But let's go back a little bit to what I meant by approaching the courts as characters, okay? While Steve Otter nails the court cards down well, what really got me to understand him was attributing a specific keyword archetype to each card. Kind of like how, you know, there's Myers-Briggs personality, kind of succinctly gets the essence of a person, okay? Now, I'm going to clean this up just so you guys know. I'm going to show a diagram in just a little bit, okay, that I made with the suits listed, specific card, and their elemental alignment plus a keyword, okay? I'll also read out what you're seeing in case my handwriting's too messy, ugly, whatever you want to put it, okay? Remember, I am going to go in depth on each card in their respective videos, okay? But what I really want you to understand now is that this method worked best for me because I am a writer and I am a reader, okay? Thinking about characters, personalities, their wants, their dreams, motivations, you know, that's not that's not hard for me to do because I already think about these things a lot. If you are similarly brained to me, this method I think is going to help you best, especially when I dive deeper into each of the different chords, okay? Now, if you work more in rote memory, I think seeing the chart might be the most helpful for you. But either way, I hope this helps deepen your understanding of the chords. And then after I show you the chart, we're gonna just kind of cut out and I'll close out. So yeah, hang in there. Okay, everyone. I hope you can see this pretty clearly. Again, I'm going to explain this because it's small. I realize it's small. So on the side here, I have the chords. There's page, knight, queen, king, okay? On top, I wrote their suits as related to tarot, but I also have their elements just so you're, aware of this, okay? The wands are here, cups, swords, and pentacles, coins, okay? For the page of wands, the best keyword I would say goes with the page of wands is the spark, okay? Now, as you'll see too, I also have the secondary elemental alignment next to them just so people don't forget that each of these cards are a combination of two. So the page of wands, for instance, is both a fire and of earth, okay? So page of wands is the spark. The page of cups is the feeler, okay? Page of swords is now I don't know, I might need to change this, but I guess the clever or the sly, maybe the sly would be a better word there, or maybe I originally put the wit, but I don't know if anyone would get that. So I'd say it's either the clever, the sly, the wit, that kind of alignment. Energy is page of swords. Page of pentacles or coins, in my opinion, is the student. Okay, these are keywords. Again, these are keywords I used that help me really understand their essence. In the videos that I want to do in the future, I will go back into, or I will dive into like characters I've seen who kind of depict these energies, or, things I thought about in relation to characters as to why I came up with these keywords, okay? So those are the pages. The knights. The Knight of Wands for me is the firecracker, okay? The Knight of Cups is the romantic. The Knight of Swords is the antagonist. Now, I want to say this now. What I mean by antagonist is not necessarily villain. Antagonist and villain are not equal. Some people think they are, but that's not true. Okay? An antagonist in a story is literally anybody who opposes the main character, okay? It doesn't mean they're necessarily the villain. It just means that they are somebody that others have had disagreements with. And I will explain that keyword a little bit better when the time comes. But for now, the Knight of Swords is the antagonist, okay? And finally, the Knight of Pentacles or coins is... Now, I don't even know if I like necessarily phrasing it as hard worker, but that's like the most succinct way right now I could put that, is that they are probably the hardest workers you will ever know, okay? Then we have the queens, okay? Sorry, I realize this is like shaking a lot. Let me see if I can adjust this so that you guys can see this a little better and without me having to hold it and prop it up and all that jazz, okay? Queen of Wands. In my opinion, the best way to phrase the Queen of Wands is the strategist. This keyword won't make sense right now. Out of all these, I don't think this one will make the most sense to you all until I explain it. But for now, just know that I see the Queen of Wands as a strategist. The Queen of Cups is the dreamer. The Queen of Swords is a truth-sayer. And the Queen of Pentacles or coins is the boss. And what I mean by boss is that, like, they are the most likely to actively get shit done, kind of, is the best way I see the Pentacles coins. Not to say that the king doesn't have that boss mentality. They are the biggest boss, but the Queen of Pentacles for me is just a boss, okay? And finally, the kings, okay? King of Wands for me is the patron. The King of Cups. Now, this keyword is also one I kind of went back and forth on this. This says composed, the composed. And really what I mean by this is that they are the most cool-headed, level-headed, calm of all the water, okay? But composed kind of succinks it nicely for me, because it's not to say that they don't have emotion. And again, I'm going to talk about this when it comes time for the kings. It's not that they don't have emotion. They are just the most composed looking with their emotions, right? They can hide it the best. So that's why the King of Cups is the composed, okay? King of Swords is the diplomat. And finally, the King of Pentacles is the delegator. This is distinct from the boss because the delegator is the biggest boss, but they are more likely to not be directly involved in work. It's more like they delegate out the jobs for other people because they know so much, if that makes any sense. Again, I will dive deeper into these keywords, but for now, I just want you guys to see them so that you know how I learned. And then I'll explain, again, I'm going to explain more of their personalities in different videos. But with that said, thank you all so much for watching. I hope this was informative enough for all of you. And I just hope it helps you out, because I really like the courts. I do. Because I see them as characters, they're really easy for me personally to understand. But I realize it's a lot harder for other people if those character traits don't feel alive in you, or in others that you know. So over time, I hope to clarify all that for you. But as an overview, this episode is done. So thank you all again for watching, and I hope it helps you on your own tarot journey. Bye.